Welcome to CFRW Presents. And now I'd like to introduce the elected president of the California Federation of Republican Women, Janet Price.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the last of our speaker series, CFRW 2023. I'm sad to see it come to a close because we have enjoyed several weeks of speakers who have enlightened us and educated us on several topics. And I know that all those who came really felt that their time was well invested. I know I have enjoyed it. So I always want to acknowledge those of you who helped so much in putting these events together. Audrey Voigt, parliamentarian pro tem, helped with the invitations and the tech part of gathering all of you together. And Sherry Gillis, our webmaster, sends out the emails that keep us connected and does a wonderful job on our website. I hope you visit it often. I also want to thank Nancy Wofford, third vice president and Region 5 director, as well as Gretchen Cox, first vice president and program chair. And she has gotten us these wonderful speakers, and tonight is no exception. So before I turn this over to Gretchen to begin our program, I want to give a shout out to the Sacramento Republican Federated Club. I don't know if you can hear me there, but we want to welcome you. And Karen Klinger is there with also the chair, Betsy Mahan. So we just want you all to feel there. I see a hand waving. Just welcoming you all up there in Sacramento. You've got a great, great club. I also want to introduce tonight, and I hope she's on right now, our past CFRW president, Carol Hadley. Is Carol on yet? If she's not yet, then let me know when she's on, because I would like to introduce her as past president. Anyway, I thank you all for coming. We've got a great night for you. And I'm going to turn it over to Gretchen now to begin our program. Thank you, Gretchen.
Hi, everybody. It's so great to have you with us tonight for our last of this part of the year, our last Zoom event before we go on summer break. It's not our last one forever. We will come back in the fall with the candidate series and some other events, but this is our last one of this part of the series. So thank you to all of you who have been here with us the whole time. We really appreciate your support. And I'm gonna we need to ask everybody, please mute yourself. We can hear you. So please put yourself on mute. Thank you, whoever. Thank you to all of you. Put yourself on mute, except for me.
And Edward.
So housekeeping, let me get right to that. Mute yourselves, please, so that we don't get distracted by any background noise, dogs barking, husbands chewing, any of that kind of stuff in the background. We want to be focused on the people who are on the screen. If you have questions, and I'm sure you will for tonight, because our speaker has so many interesting things to talk about, please put them in the chat at the bottom of your screen. At the end of tonight's talk, he will go for about 40 or 45 minutes. He will have a slide presentation, so if he runs a little over, that's not a problem. We will go through the questions that you have submitted in the chat, and then we may have a few extras on top of that. In the meantime, please do not unmute yourselves to speak. If you are trying to get our attention, raise your hand. You have a little button for that down there, and we will keep up with that as quickly as possible. We do plan to finish tonight at 7:30. We may have a few minutes extra to visit, but our host tonight, Audrey Voigt, does need to get off fairly soon after we end. So we may not have as much visiting time afterwards, but Anyway, so that's it. And again, the last thing, please keep yourselves muted. So I am so happy to introduce our speaker tonight. I found him because I was listening to the Steve Hilton podcast about a month ago, and he had this gentleman on, and I was just completely engrossed the whole time they were on. I got through my 5-mile walk in record time. It was so fascinating to listen to him. Our speaker tonight is Mr. Edward Ring. He is a contributing editor and senior fellow with the California Policy Center, which he co-founded in 2013, and he served as its first president. He is also a senior fellow with the Center for American Greatness and a regular contributor to the California Globe. His work has appeared in the Los Angeles Times, the Wall Street Journal, the National Review, Epoch Times, Real Clear Politics, The American Mind, Cal Matters, City Journal, and other media outlets. Mr. Ring has an undergraduate degree in political philosophy from UC Davis and an MBA in finance from USC. He's the author of 2 books, Fixing California, Abundance, Pragmatism, and Optimism, and The Abundance Choice, Our Fight for More Water in California. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Mr. Edward Ring. Thank you for being here tonight.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. I don't know quite where to begin with an introduction like that. I have been a prolific writer, and every now and then one of them strikes a chord. The one, Realigning California Will Realign America, was one of those. I got to know Steve Hilton after that, who, by the way, has started an organization called Golden California, which hopefully is going to be throwing its weight behind our movement and helping hopefully to get more people elected and better policies. The essence of this article is that California has really an opportunity to realign if we recognize who the target voters are and bring them the messages that they're looking for and that they need. And I think I'd like to just dive in by sharing my PowerPoint presentation that has a lot of facts in it that should be very interesting and useful. And I can share this file afterwards with anybody who would like to view it, just to have access to a lot of the material in it. Okay, so are we seeing what we're supposed to see at this point?
Very good.
Okay,
Yes.
so you don't see me anymore. I can make funny expressions and all we see is the PowerPoint, or how's that working?
You on the
I
side.
see you. You're
I'm
on
over on
side.
the side, but not as
Yeah.
prominent, thankfully.
Right.
Okay, so this is about realigning California, the biggest, wealthiest, most influential state. If we do that, we'll change America, and we'll also change the world. If we change America, certainly the Western world. I'll start out with things we all know, pretty obvious: a cultural trendsetter, epicenter of technology. It's really the technology capital of the world. We have 186 billionaires, according to Forbes magazine, living in California. It's more than anywhere else on earth. So this is an incredibly powerful state. Biggest congressional delegation, $3 trillion GDP. We've got everything here. It's just a shame that we're squandering it. We're doing really relatively well in California in spite of the government that we unfortunately live under. It's pretty hard to kill California with even with the policies we've got, but we still have, and these are the things I think that are going to reach other voters that we don't have yet. We have to do something about education, crime, and the cost of living. And so I'm going to get a little bit wonky by giving you information on specific solutions to each of those 3 issues. And again, you can have a copy of this afterwards, but that is the message. And so, we've talked about why Republicans lose in California a lot. And these, you can call them excuses if you like. I think that might be a little harsh because they're true. All right, we are up against this, but we have to accept that and fight anyway. We don't have as much money as they do. We've got these legacies of Prop 187 on immigration, Prop 8 on gay marriage, and in both cases, I had a Democratic operative kind of laughingly tell me it's so easy to demonize Republicans, and they go all the way back. Prop 187 was in the 90s. Prop 8, it's been 15 years now. These things are ancient history in many respects, but they're still used against Republicans. The media has always been biased. We've all experienced that. And Trump, whether you love him or hate him, he is associated with Republicans in order to damage Republicans in blue states, and it works. Excuse me. So that's kind of what we're up against. But here's the real reason, in my opinion, that we lose, because we have issues that would allow us to overcome those kinds of disadvantages. And just look at Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was not necessarily the Republican that we all dreamed that he was going to be, but he came forward and was a very exciting candidate. And in spite of everything they threw at him, he won. So if you get a candidate that has the charisma and that has the charisma to attract voters, you're halfway there. And then you have to have a message. We don't really have a coherent message in California politics. If you read the platform of the California Republican Party, it's the result of all kinds, endless committee deliberations. I think it's 14 pages long. It's in pretty small font. It's a PDF, and it covers everything. Everything's in it. And everything sounds pretty good and is the result of all kinds of compromises and contention, but it's not a distilled platform that focuses in on just a handful of issues that would transform the electorate. And so let's talk about that electorate. As I argued in the article, and I think this is very, very important to understand, we're not going to attract too many white voters in California. We have 6 million voters that voted for Trump in 2020, and that was up from 4.5 million in 2016. Think about the momentum that represents. A figure as controversial as Trump in a state as blue as California increased his voting total by about 30% between 2016 and 2020. We have 6 million voters that, if we can sufficiently motivate them to turn out, are voters we can rely on. Now, compare that to the turnout in 2022. In 2022, it was just short of 12 million people voted. 11.7 million people voted in the state of California in 2022. Imagine if every one of those 6 million Republican voters had voted in 2022. Imagine how many candidates would have won who lost. So it's just something to think about. Obviously, that's not a definitive proportion. A lot of them voted anyway. There would have been a lot of Democrats that came out, but it's just something to think about. You have a base of 6 million voters, which it can be quite significant. So we have to respect the voters we've got, but think twice about trying to spend too much time converting other white voters, because these are people who are multi-generational Californians living in houses where they don't pay property taxes and probably don't have a mortgage. They're probably living in their parents' or their grandparents' house. They don't see the consequences of democratic rule the way that people that are running small businesses and struggling to pay mortgages and homes that they only bought in the last 5 or 10 years have to confront. So where are the voters? The voters are everybody else. And one of the things that is not generally understood in California is we don't have a lot of Black voters, actually. They're only 5% of the population in California. They're 15%, 14% of the population in the rest of the country when you take into account the low percentage in California. So obviously we want to reach out to those voters, and the message that we will successfully reach out to Black voters with is the same one that we can use with Asians and Hispanics, because the issues that we're working on are colorblind issues. But you have to understand where your voters are and target them appropriately. This is likely voters. This comes from the Public Policy Research Institute. Blacks actually turn out a little bit more than they're represented in the population. So do whites. Asians are almost exactly turning out in the proportion that they represent in the population.
Right.
Latinos are very underrepresented. They don't turn out in very high numbers. I'm speaking from memory because I can't see my notes. Actually, here's some. Yeah, here it is. They're 35% of eligible voters, and only 22% turned out. They're 40% of the population, taking into account underage voters, and they're 60% of the K-12 population. So let's imagine that California's eligible voters in a few years reflect, because they will. I mean, this is baked in. Unless we have something extraordinary in terms of immigration trends that changes this within 20 years, this is what you're going to see in the electorate. These will be the eligible voters. This is based precisely on K-12 enrollment in California. This comes straight from the California Department of Education. Look at that, 22% white will be the voting population. So even if you do successfully attract all of those white liberals to vote for you, it won't matter. You've got to get everybody else. So for example, here's what determines registration today. This is 2020 numbers. And because of turnout, you see, and registration trends, you see that the white voter is still pretty much determining who the Democrats are. 48% of Democrats in California are white. Now let's extrapolate with the numbers that you just saw on this pie chart and apply the same party preferences. This is what you get. Look at that. In order for, and think about what this means. This means that Democrats, to maintain their overwhelming dominance, if they don't maintain their overwhelming dominance among Latinos and Asians, they won't retain their majority. The white voters are more or less insignificant in shifting the majority in the future. So this is where, again, it's important to have colorblind policies and not get drawn in to the issues that are polarizing. So that, and so when we talk about messages, because that's what we need, the social issues are polarizing issues that are used to basically to repel voters from Republicans. If you can stick to common sense on social issues, in other words, if you talk about why we need to focus on fundamentals in the public schools and not so much about why we need to stop. Obviously, we need to stop age inappropriate instruction in the public schools. But if you make that your whole issue, instead of talking about, well, let's get back to holding teachers accountable, let's get back to emphasizing the 3 R's, so to speak, you won't be as easily stereotyped. And that's their whole playbook, is stereotyping Republicans as bigots. So, just kind of not avoiding those issues, but discussing those issues sort of as this is important, this is our position, we have a common sense position, we care about the children, but why aren't you talking about making education truly useful so that people have marketable skills when they graduate? Why don't we talk about crime? Why don't we talk about the cost of living? So now I'm going to go into things that you can specifically talk about on those 3 issues. There's 3 ways, at least 3 ways to restore quality education. Charter schools is one of them. And you can see here some specific reforms that would help a great deal. And by the way, the charter, I'm going to come to this theme again and again. The California Charter School Association is afraid of this agenda. They're afraid of angering the California Teachers Association. Most of the people that are the good guys that represent trade associations and institutions, and I've seen this in everything from water and energy to public education, are afraid of being targeted. So it's not up to them, because they're fighting a defensive battle, they're fighting an incremental battle. It's up to us to go out and demand these things. And by communicating them to voters, by putting ballot initiatives out there. Look at what happens nowadays in the charter schools. They make it so if you get denied, you have no appeal. So, and then they deny based on things like the financial impact, which we have proven is not true, but it works in a courtroom. There shouldn't be a cap on schools or enrollment. There is. So these kinds of, and again, I'll share this with you so I don't have to dwell on it for very long. We've got a lot of slides. The other one is what we used to call school vouchers. Let's call them universal education savings accounts. It's a different way of helping people to have school choice. You get an education savings account for every student. And then every year that account is credited with the pro rata education funding, which, as we know, is 40% of the general fund. I think last year it was about $14,000 per student. The average cost of a private or a school in California is less than $14,000. So while you have a lot of private schools that cost a lot more than that, there are parochial schools, for example, and a lot of private schools that can do it for less. And the parents can direct the money to the school of their choice. And if they have money left over, it can build up in an account. Now, this was proposed by Senator Morlock in 2018, and 2 initiatives were approved for circulation in 2021. There should have been only 1. And this is something else that we have to fight in the Republican Party, because they couldn't agree on means testing, which would have, one of the groups wanted to have means testing for the eligibility just in the first couple of years, and then it would be phased out. The other group would not accept that. So they had competing initiatives and they didn't have a chance. All the donors ran away. And why not rescue the public schools? Let's get rid of the woke curricula. I don't need to elaborate. We all know what that is. We have to reestablish classroom discipline instead of this so-called restorative justice. It doesn't work for the students don't respect it, and it disrupts all of the students that are trying to learn. And we need to get rid of the workarounds with college admissions, so that there's a lot of workarounds where they have what they call holistic admission, criteria, which means your SAT score doesn't matter, even though there's so much data that SAT scores are very predictive of academic success. The Vergara case would have lengthened the period for tenure, would have made it easier to lay off incompetent teachers instead of keeping the senior teachers and letting the good or great teachers go whenever there is for example, a change in enrollment. You have to reduce the number of teachers. And you can't get rid of bad teachers still in the state of California. In 2016, there was a case filed by a group called Students Matter. Went to the state Supreme Court. It was denied on a technicality. Again, I've got too many slides to go into that. And we need standardized aptitude tests as the primary criteria for teacher performance and college admissions. And these are just some examples of how we can restore quality education. But as I was saying, the problem here isn't that voters aren't receptive to this, because they will be. The problem is California's institutions, like the California Charter School Association, are terrified of challenging the left, and they're not, and this is an intelligent, rational decision they're making, because they don't want to get targeted. But as a result, you have this policy of incremental defensive, that's where they're putting all of their resources, is into incremental defense. So one of the things you can do with all of these institutions is let them know how you feel. One of the things, for example, with biased journalists, and we've done this in the water movement, we actually identify the bureaucrat, the person who's actually at the wheel saying, will I turn on or turn off the Delta pumps in order so that we can have farmland, this summer? And we flooded them with emails and phone calls, and it helped. It might have made the difference. Why aren't we, organizing grassroots activists to flood the zone when a journalist writes something that's completely misleading? You don't have to do anything, radical or edgy. You can just send them a polite email saying, why did you write that? Why didn't you tell the other side of the story? And that kind of pressure comes a lot from the other side, but our side doesn't do it enough. If you inundate journalists, public bureaucrats, corporate CEOs who are caving in to these policies, and let them know that there's two sides that have two stories and two points of view here, because they're too often only getting one side. And so they're intimidated by that, and that needs to change. We talk about crime as the number 2 big issue after education. There are ways to fix this that we've tried. You know, the police officers union, whatever else you want to say about public sector unions, tried to do the right thing in 2020 with Prop 20. And in the notes in the file I can share with you, I have a link to that. It would have done some of the things here. It would have reclassified petty theft if it's repeat petty theft as a felony, and it would have reclassified some drug offenses as a felony. You know, I've talked with police officers, and they don't have the ability to hold arrest as a threat over the head of people that are making trouble in the streets. They know who these troublemakers are. They know who the people are who are a danger to themselves or to others, and they can't do anything about it. In the old days, you used to be able to say to a career criminal who was back on the streets, you know, if I have to bring you in, that's going to be your 3rd strike. And it worked. It deterred crime. And obviously, we need to recall some of these district attorneys. It was done in San Francisco. And by the way, that was the Asian community that did that. They're also the ones that organized to get rid of 3 school board members in San Francisco. These are allies. We have to do something about the homeless that takes into account every person working with the homeless that I've talked with, outside of some of the bureaucrats that have a vested interest in homelessness, have said, if you can't incarcerate people that are addicted to heroin or just hardcore alcoholics, and of course people who are mentally ill, but a lot of this mental illness is because of the drug and alcohol addiction. If you can't compel them to get treatment, they won't do it. So we have to change the laws, and we have to figure out some way to help these people that is not voluntary. So, you know, there's a big connection between crime and homelessness now in California. And there's something that we call the homeless industrial complex. And, you know, I first heard about this about 4 years ago. And, you know, for someone who's been involved in politics almost full time for over a decade now, it wasn't immediately apparent to me, but the bureaucracies, and I think everybody's sort of getting it now, the bureaucracies that are tasked to treat homelessness and to help the homeless profit off of the problem getting worse. And that's precisely what's happened. We've spent tens of billions of dollars in California on homelessness. And the amount of money that we're paying under these so-called housing first policies, where there's absolutely no conditions on getting into housing, so-called permanent supportive housing. You can continue to be a drug addict, you can refuse to get job counseling, and you're still eligible. And the housing is appallingly expensive. The average price for homeless housing is about $500,000 per studio apartment. That's crazy. And they're building this stuff in some of the most expensive real estate in the world. You know, Venice Beach in Los Angeles is an epicenter of homelessness, one of them. And they're building I think they've broken ground on it now. The total project cost for this supportive housing is over $200 million. If you include the land, it's about 105 million construction, about 90 million for the land latest. And these things vary, obviously, but they're only going to have 140 units. I mean, think about that. That's like $800,000 a unit. It's absolutely crazy. So if you have shelters like we used to have, 2 things happen. First of all, you save all kinds of money, and you can give people job training, and you can give them drug treatment programs and so forth, because you've got the money for that now, and you'd still come out with savings. But the other thing with these shelters is it would become a deterrent, because a lot of homeless people, they come out here because they know they can live on the streets. They know that there'll be homeless assistance workers that'll be giving them needles and giving them food, and the weather's pretty good, especially on the Southern California coast. they'll go home or they'll find somewhere to go if they realize that they can be compelled to go into a shelter. And that has to change. And the law already permits it. The reason we're not building these shelters is because we don't have the political will. The law only requires that you have a bed and a roof. It doesn't require an $800,000 or $500,000 studio apartment. This is a scam, and it needs to be exposed, and it can be exposed. There's other things here. I mean, California laws do have to be changed in some of these areas. Right now, if you're a shelter that wants any public money, you're not allowed to segregate by gender. And so you have battered women who can't go to a place. There are places where they can, but a lot of them don't get public money. They have to go in somewhere where there's men, or families have to go somewhere where there's, vagrant men that are in the same facility.
Terrible. Maggie, come here. Have a
Yeah. So these kinds of things have to change. And there's just, again, I have so many slides, I got to keep galloping through them. Why is disorderly conduct and vagrancy not a crime anymore? These things have to be changed. And these are the kinds of things that people it's going to resonate with people who have common sense and understand the obligations of compassion. You can't just be compassionate to the point where you're enabling this kind of behavior, because you're not doing anybody a favor. It would be the best thing that ever happened to some of these people if they were compelled to go get treatment. So this has nothing to do with white, black, brown, Asian. It has everything to do with common sense and having a functional society with institutions that we can rely on and trust. Everybody wants safety. So, joining forces, in this case with activist groups that want to restore criminal accountability. Look at all the small business owners. Go down to the barrio and talk to people that are running small restaurants in the barrio. They're going to be on your side. They're going to be backing your candidates. Get in there, because they're going to be 60% of the electorate before you know it. Find groups that are exposing the homeless industrial complex. You can find them on Facebook. They've got tens of thousands of members. These are natural Republican voters if you get candidates that are staying away from the polarizing issues and focusing on these issues. But this is the biggest issue. And if I've talked in too many generalities, or not really something that's the magic bullet, I mean, who knows what the magic bullet is? At least if you get your hands on this file, take a look at some of the facts that I'm going to share with you, because there are two things that are fundamental to the unaffordable cost of living in California. More than two, but two big ones are water and energy. We have engineered scarcity. And if you want to appeal to left-wing voters, for goodness sakes, think about the fact that the reason that we're not investing in water, one of them, isn't the crazy environmentalists. They're being used. The other reason is financial special interests, big hedge funds, big university endowments, sovereign wealth funds. They're going through the San Joaquin Valley and the Imperial Valley, and they're buying up farmland for the water rights. And if there's more water, the value of their investment goes down. And this is well documented. So when you get a candidate out there, and bring that up, and you'd be amazed at how many people are going to be, Michelle Hurtado, who's a Democrat, but she's kind of a dino. She's a little bit of a Republican on a lot of issues. She won her district by 13 votes. And that was one of her biggest issues, was there's hedge funds that are buying up the farmland in our district, and they don't want water because they want more valuable land, and they want the land for the water rights. Starting to digress a little bit. So here's the biggest message of all. We need to understand, and Gavin Newsom's picked up on this. Democrats are picking up on this, but they're only doing it rhetorically. They can be exposed. They're actually helping us by trying to co-opt this rhetoric, because they're calling attention to it, and then they can be exposed for not executing according to the implications of what they're saying. We need abundance in California, not rationing, not scarcity, and it's feasible to do it. And I'm going to illustrate some of that. If you have affordable water and energy, you can get housing permits, for example. You can't build housing subdivisions in California because there's no water available. And so they get denied the permit, and all of a sudden, 700 homes don't get built. By the way, lumber in California ought to cost half or a third as much as it does because the environmentalists have crippled the timber industry and shut down all the mills. We used to harvest 6 billion board feet in California as recently as the 1990s. That's down to about a little over 1.5 billion board feet. It's down to almost a quarter of the size that it was. All of that wood that's not being taken out of the forest is why we're having these fires. And that's also well documented. There's all kinds of studies into tree density. It's much higher than what's historically normal. The high density of trees in the forest and in the chaparral is because we've been suppressing fires at the same time as we killed the logging industry and we killed the grazing. There used to be goats and sheep and cattle that would go up into the foothills and eat the understorage. All of that's been killed by environmentalists. That has to change. And you not only protect the forests, but you have affordable lumber, which translates into affordable homes. The abundance theme, the abundance message is going to win over voters because it's true and it's desperately needed. I want to kind of set the stage for how crazy the renewable strategy is by first of all showing you how much where we get our energy and where we put our energy. This is where energy goes. Most of it is wasted, which is, by the way, the case for electrification. Electric cars convert electricity into traction more efficiently than gasoline does. Okay, that's so far so good. But we burn through 2/3 of all the fuel input in the state. And if you look at what it would take to turn California electric, and this is the key point here, look at where we're getting our electricity currently. Half of it's coming from natural gas, 9% nuclear, 6% hydro, and then the rest here, 1/3 of it is the so-called renewables. So 1/3 of our electricity. Now that translates, these are just, if you don't really grasp the units, grasp the proportions. The proportions is what's important. We generate 22 gigawatt years. They like to use terawatt hours, and I think they just do that to confuse us. Because if you talk about gigawatt years, you're talking about California's grid uses 32 gigawatts on average. Okay, we talk about terawatt hours, we get all confused. We only generate 60%, 60 to 70% in state. We import the rest of it. So that 22 gigawatt years is 1/5 of what we are going to need if we go electric as a state, which, as you know, they're absolutely bound to do this. You know, the whole net zero, that's the cornerstone of democratic energy policy. That's their whole thing is, you've heard it, net zero. Well, how are you going to do that? How are you going to electrify the economy, which requires you to quintuple electricity production in this state, okay, when half of it is coming, or 2/3 of it is coming from unacceptable sources, large hydro, nuclear, and natural gas? That means you have to increase your renewables by 12 times. Everywhere you see something. Oh, and by the way, geothermal and biomass and small hydro are limited. So you really, if you're just going to go solar and wind, that's 20 times. So I got to move on. Let's talk about offshore wind, because that's how they think they're going to do it. And, you know, don't quote me too widely here, because she's a friend of mine. I actually, it's a long story, but Eleni Sarkopoulos, who's, by the way, declared her candidacy for governor, was speaking to farmers about a month ago, and they said, how are you going to get all this electricity? And she brought up offshore wind. And that inspired me to look into offshore wind. We have already leased, and the federal government collected $750 million for 5 companies to have the rights to build floating offshore wind turbines off the coasts of San Luis Obispo County and Humboldt County, 583 square miles. They're going, that's going to generate 4.5 gigawatts. Remember, we're talking about gigawatts. We need 105 gigawatts. What they don't tell you is the wind doesn't blow all the time. So that best case, all of those wind turbines are only going to give you 1.8 so-called gigawatt years, which are actually units of electricity. which as you can easily see is less than 2%. It's about 1.5% of what we're going to need. 1.5%. So how are they going to do that? They're going to put 450 turbines at 10 megawatts each with a 40% yield. That's your 1.8 gigawatts. Less than 1.5% of the electricity we're going to need is 450 turbines. These things are 1,000 feet tall. They're cabled to the seafloor almost a mile deep. Okay, so they're floating, held by cables. There's no ships to go out and build them. There's no ports to go out and build them or maintain them. They're going to have to put a high voltage transmission line on the bottom of the ocean. It's going to be an incredible hazard. The whole coast's only 600 miles long. How are you going to get all of these in place? So, and take a look at this thing. Here's the Statue of Liberty. Can you guys see my cursor? You don't see the cursor, do you? It's the second from the right is the Statue of Liberty, the little tiny thing, second from the right. Here's the 10 megawatt wind turbine. It's the wind turbine that's on the left next to the Eiffel Tower. The Eiffel Tower and I guess some large skyscraper in London that's 1,000 feet tall. Think about this. This is 3 times the height of the Statue of Liberty from the waterline to the tip of the torch. It's 3 times bigger than that. They would need 24,000 of them in order to get us to the electricity they say we're going to need. They would need 24,000. They need a mile of space each. That would be 24,000 square miles. That's an incredible, impossible thing to do. You could do it with solar panels and you'd only carpet 1,200 square miles. And so when people talk about wind and solar, solar has a place in our energy future that's a lot more feasible than wind. I'm not advocating solar. I'm merely saying if you're going to pick your poison, go with solar. Wind power is crazy. It's just the amount of space and disruption that it's causing, the expense of putting those things out in the ocean. It's nuts. It's driven by special interests. The way to do it, if we're serious about having abundant energy in California, is to allow advanced hybrids, not just pure EVs. There's all kinds of cars that can run on so-called carbon neutral combustible fuel. We don't know what's coming, but we froze all of that out and said it had to be, there could be no combustion. It has to be a pure EV. That's crazy. There are natural gas generating plants using new technologies where they harvest the steam from the gas turbine and use it to drive a helium turbine. Instead of, it uses helium as the medium instead of steam. These are called combined cycle power plants, and they can convert 80% of the natural gas energy that's going into them into electricity. That's extraordinary. Things like that should not be froze out of our energy economy. We should be retrofitting our natural gas power plants to go from 60% efficiency to 80% efficiency. We shouldn't be shutting them down, which is what we're doing. And the only reason we're not shutting more of them down is because Gavin Newsom's running for president. We should end the war on household natural gas. And why don't we build another couple of nuclear power plants? I know people get scared when we talk about nuclear power plants, but nuclear power should be part of the mix. What we need is an all of the above energy strategy where, you know, in some appropriate places, maybe we'll have some more wind farms, we'll have some solar farms, we'll have some nuclear power, we'll have natural gas, we'll have a little bit of everything. That's how you achieve energy abundance. And back in the old days, this wouldn't have been a debate. In the 50s or 60s, if we had these technologies, that's exactly what we'd be doing. I want to talk about water a little bit, and this will give you a perspective on water. And the thing to see here is we're diverting 75 million acre feet a year. This is based on a 7-year average through 2018. It's hard to get more recent data. 33 million acre feet a year is so-called environmental water. That's the water that we save behind dams and then release to, for example, help the salmon. So if you want to, if you talk to people that want more water for their farm economy in California, which is very threatened, this is the first thing they'll tell you. We're saving all the water for the environment, and it's not working. You know, if we're worried about the salmon, why aren't we raising the limit on bass? introduced alien species, striped bass, largemouth bass. They wait in the shallows. I live near the American River. My wife and I walk along there. We talk to the fishermen. The bass wait in the shallows. They know when they're going to release the salmon fingerlings from the fish hatchery, and they eat them all. Why couldn't they at least take off the limit on bass fishing for a few weeks before they release the salmon fingerlings? Give them a chance. These are the kinds of things that are not talked about in Sacramento and need to be. But you have this alliance between the anglers, the people that, commercial bass fishing is a big business. And so they make common cause with the environmentalists, and nobody wants to stand up to them. The other thing to get off this slide is look at interior residential water use. 2.7 out of 75 million. Okay, it's what, 3.5% of the water that we save behind dams. These are the people that are telling you to put a bucket in your shower. I actually did a calculation of how much water you'd save if you put a bucket in your shower. Did a calculation how much water you'd save if they crammed us down to 40 gallons per person per day, which is still active in the state legislature, and it's insignificant. It makes almost no difference. So the idea that we're building all of these appliances, I mean, it makes sense to have appliances that don't just squander water, but we've done all of that at this point. We're going to that extra mile, which is only good for the appliance manufacturers. It doesn't help the environment, doesn't help anything. So again, it's an all of the above strategy. Conservation's not enough. We're all in this together, North and South. This is something we should think about as a state together. If you're worried about climate change, for goodness sakes, you should be more committed to building more water supply infrastructure. We need resilience. We need it not only for, a drought. We need it if there's a cyber attack on the Tehachapi pumps. Can you imagine what would happen if they couldn't pump 2.5 million acre feet into the Los Angeles basin every year, and they hadn't built some desalination plants? They hadn't done more to recycle their urban wastewater. They hadn't done more to harvest local storm runoff and put it into their aquifers. Imagine if they hadn't made those investments and we have a cyber attack on the pumps that bring all that water into Los Angeles. So it's not just climate concerns that should motivate us to have resilience. It's everything that could happen to disrupt our water infrastructure. And by the way, energy cost for water is not significant. They say 20% of California's energy is for water. That's misleading, because what is really using energy for water is heating. Commercial and residential water heating uses up about 90% of that 20%. And the rest of it is what is called water operations, which is water treatment and pumping water all over the state. So again, you have to challenge these misleading assertions. When people say, oh, we can't have more water because it'll cost us too much energy, they're misinformed. We just talked about this. Conservation's not enough. We could have another drought, obviously. We're negotiating less Colorado River water. The Colorado River was delivering 15 million acre feet on average when they negotiated the compact between the lower basin states and said, we'll pull 15 million acre feet out every year. But what happened was, over the last 20 years or so, there's only been 12 million acre feet of runoff. And so they've drained Lake Powell, they've drained Lake Mead. We're not going to get as much water from the Colorado River. We get 5 million acre feet a year from the Colorado River. We're probably going to be down to 3 or 4 for the next several years. It might be permanent. And we pump 19 million acre feet of groundwater every year. And that's why the aqueducts are degraded, because there's been land subsidence, because the aquifers are collapsing. We're pumping it out faster than we're putting it in. And the problem is, when the environmentalists continued to tell farmers, you can't take the water out of the river anymore. You got to leave the water in the river. There's been every year, there's more water has to stay in the river. And they put the water, they hide it, they hold it behind the dams, and they save it to just run through in pulses to help the salmon. And the farmers can't use it, so they pump groundwater. And now we have a groundwater crisis. This will not be solved with rationing. We have to have more water. Here's where we can get it.
Edward, I'm going to
Yes.
interrupt you just for 1 minute. I'm so sorry. It's coming up on 7:20, so we do want to leave a little time for Q&A. So I'm going to just kind of give you a heads up on that. We just got a couple minutes left.
All right, I'm going to go fast then.
Okay,
And
I'm
you guys
sorry.
can, no, you know what? I should have been looking at the clock.
That's okay.
You guys can have this file. This is where these are the projects where we can get more water. These are some of the ways we can get more water. This is better than the Delta pumps. It'll cost a lot less. It won't hurt the fish. There are solutions. Look at all this water. Just look at the bars. That's how much extra water goes flowing through the Delta in wet years that we ought to be capturing and storing in aquifers. This is where we could get that water. This is an explanation of how that works. Look at this. Spend 1 minute, no, half a minute on this. 5 reservoirs we should have built by now. Okay, would have been 1 million acre-feet of additional storage. They won't let us build it. Raise the Shasta Dam, that's number 6. They won't let us do it. What a bargain that would be. It would have been full this year. Temperance Flat, south of the Delta, doesn't need a tunnel. Would have been full. Wouldn't let us build it. Now, urban wastewater and urban runoff, environmentalists approve of that stuff, but you still have so much red tape. Desal, environmentalists are crazy against it. It costs, they build it in Israel for 1/4 the cost that we have been building them here. We only built one big plant down in San Diego. We had another one in Huntington Beach, got denied. But why are we spending? Why do we have to spend that much for desalinated water? It's because of the permit problems and the litigation. So here, you know, and it would be 1.3 gigawatts is all it would take to produce another 5 million acre-feet of water. And you know, again, that's less than 2% of our total energy that we need. It would cost $100 billion. You go, $100 billion, that's a lot. In 1957, we allocated $12 billion nearly. The state budget at that time was 1.9 billion, 1.9. So they budgeted 6 times their annual budget. If we spent 100 billion today, it would be 1/3 of our annual budget. That's the commitment that Californians were willing to make in the 1950s and 60s to have water abundance, and it worked. And here are the bad guys. There's the logos of all the environmental organizations. So if we want to make California affordable, we have to have the things I've been talking about. We have to make it easier to build homes. We have to have affordable water and energy. You could do all the energy with private investment if we just deregulated. It wouldn't cost taxpayers a dime. And we have to reject extreme environmentalism. So here's the final slide. We should offer specific solutions for what people really want, for things that are bipartisan, things of universal urgency. And that would be education, public safety, and getting the cost of living under control. And you can do that with pragmatic projects and proposals. And you can do that with tremendous optimism, which is also something that the Democrats really are missing. And it would be a tremendous weapon to talk about these things and deliver these messages with optimism, because optimism is warranted. We can do all these things.
Okay, this was amazing. It was just like when I listened to you on the Steve Hilton show. You covered so many different issues, and you did it quickly, and you did it really in a way that made it so easy to understand. So I just so appreciate the way you're able to present this. I know you rushed through to get us as much information as possible, but yes, I definitely would appreciate if you'd send me the PowerPoint, and then if you're, with your permission, we'll put it up on our website so that they can, anybody that wants to can access it. Is that all right?
Yes, sure.
Okay, great. Okay. I'm going to ask you one quick question, and then Nancy Wolford, our third vice president, is going to start off the real questioning. My question to you is, when are you running for office, preferably governor? Or are you too smart for that?
You know, I don't have any political experience, and I don't know that would be the best way to do this, because I think the person that can win needs to be somebody that has either political experience or a very high profile. So thank you for that question, but I'm not sure I'm the right person for that job.
So what you're saying is you're too smart to run for office.
So I was going to say.
Well,
Way too
first
smart.
of all, I'm not that smart. I worked pretty hard on these numbers and been thinking about all this stuff for a long time. I think we need somebody with common sense to be in politics. It does help to have a little bit of training in accounting or finance or engineering. I don't think we have enough people in politics with those backgrounds. It's funny because I did an analysis of the California legislature between Republicans and Democrats, and it turns out that the vast majority of Republicans come from private business, which does require those kinds of skills. And the vast majority of Democrats come out of either nonprofits or labor unions, which do not require those kinds of skills. So, you know, if we find candidates, I would love to help, you know, find candidates. I think I do that, actually. I also think that ballot initiatives is something we didn't talk about too much tonight, but there are still some ways to do grassroots ballot initiatives that might beat the odds and put something in front of California voters that could swiftly make a difference. I mean, let's say I was governor. So what? I'm against a mega majority in the state legislature. Yes, a Republican governor could veto stuff that's not overwhelmingly supported by Democrats, and they could issue executive orders, that might not get struck down in court. But we need to shift. We need to swing the legislature. We need to take over this state. We need to become the dominant party, and that's going to take a lot of candidates.
Okay.
Nancy, do you want to take some questions for him?
Sure. I'll ask a question here. We've had this amazing snowpack in California, and it's like its highest level in decades, and it's bringing drought relief to several regions, as well as concerns about flooding, of course. But where does all this runoff go? And now they're releasing are they now releasing reservoir water to the ocean? It just kind of doesn't. That's what they do in California, is they send it out.
Yeah, this year there was so much water, and Gavin Newsom wants to be president so bad, and there was so much pressure by grassroots organizations on our side that he stood up to the environmentalist lobby in some critical situations. They were able to run at capacity for a very long time this winter, and they filled up a lot of the downstream, off-stream reservoirs that depend on aqueduct water. They pump the water up into San Luis Reservoir, for example, 2 million acre feet. It's full, and we drove by there. It's beautiful. I mean, it's a sea. That thing's vast. It's too bad we don't have 3 or 4 of them. We should. But the problem with all this water is it takes time to recharge the aquifers. And that's where we fell short. And even, because if we had more reservoirs and had better capacity to refill aquifers, this storm could have bought us, 5 or 10 years of water security. Maybe not 10 years. It depends on, it depends, right? It depends on how much rain we get in subsequent years. I don't know if I answered your question. They held off for too long, but surprisingly, by about mid-February, Newsom just said, "Turn on the pumps," and they did.
Wow. Okay. Now I know that the Colorado River is fed by about 7 different states. How come California? What's going on with California that they haven't come up with the solution to, when we do get water and stuff, to start putting it in there, because those 7 states depend on it.
Yeah, you have the upper basin states, Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, and the lower basin states, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Nevada. Actually, I think New Mexico is considered an upper basin state. California has the senior water rights because we developed our big Southern California cities and built the California aqueduct, or the Colorado aqueduct, excuse me. We built that up back in I think 1912, 1913. In fact, it broke at one point, which is why we have the Salton Sea. It took 2 years to repair. But because we developed first, we had senior water rights. And in this recent dispute where it was acknowledged, because Lake Powell and Lake Mead, they have 25 million acre feet each of capacity and were full at the turn of the century. And now they're both nearing what's referred to as dead pool, where there's not enough water to even keep flowing through the hydroelectric turbines. So they had to stop. Now, we did get more rain this winter, which, that happened after the crisis was acknowledged. California senior water rights gives us a lot of leverage, but the federal government, because there was an impasse, went in and said, you guys are going to have to cut back by 3 million acre feet a year. And that's, we get 5 million acre feet a year from the Colorado River. Now, 4 million of that goes to the Imperial Valley. The rest of it goes to San Diego and Los Angeles for urban use. We can't absorb a very big cut without decimating Imperial Valley farming. One of the things they're doing is they've come up with an idea where they're going to pay Imperial Valley farmers to allocate their water back to the upper basin or back to the other states. So we'll probably see less agricultural production in the Imperial Valley.
Thank you.
Okay. How expensive is it to reuse wastewater? And is that something that farmers and ranchers can look at to cut their water costs?
That's a good question, and it's a complicated question. It depends on the wastewater. When we looked at, for example, Orange County now recycles 100% of their urban wastewater, and they're able to, of the 100% that goes in, they get 85 to 90% back, and the rest of it they have to basically figure out how to dispose of. The way they dispose of it currently is by diluting it in the aquifers, which works for them because they have a 60 million acre foot aquifer. That won't work everywhere. So there's a lot of technical problems that still have to be solved with urban wastewater recycling. They do a lot of it in San Diego too. The problem with wastewater and with desalination is what you have left after you've done it. Desalination is actually a little easier because you can disperse the water into the California current, and all it is slightly saltier ocean water. Of course, that's not good enough for the environmentalists. But when you talk about what it costs, we have about 2 million acre feet of wastewater that's not being recycled currently per year in California, and the estimates are it would cost $30 billion to build the facilities to fix it. That sounds like a lot of money because it is, but think about the amounts of money we're spending on other things. I mean, and the things that are absolutely ridiculous. The bullet train will always be a economic drain on the state. The reason that it got approved is because the labor unions didn't want to fight the environmentalists. They just wanted their guys to work. And this was a way that the environmentalists approved of. And so it's a make work project. That's what the high-speed rail is. You could take that 100 million, that would pay for everything we need to do with water. You could deregulate, and private sector could take care of everything we need to do with energy.
Nancy, I'm sorry, I'm going to jump off script a little bit here, but just listening to what you just said, and you said you made a couple of similar points during your presentation. How is, when you present all this information, whether it's for us or, some other group, how is the best way, or what is the best way to get the information that you have that is so logical and makes so much sense, to get it out to the general public? I mean, is that something that groups like ours, Republican Women or things, it just seems like that's what needs to happen is, however many of us are on this Zoom tonight isn't going to make, it's just a drop in the bucket for everybody that really in the state that needs to hear this and understand something beyond the crap that we're fed by the environmentalists and the just the general media and the politicians. How do we get this out, or what is the best way to get this out?
Well, you know, the
to
first
educate people.
the first thing is not to, you know, disparage environmentalism as a movement. I mean, I'm very thrilled that we saved the condor, for example. Environmentalists did that, and that's a heck of a bird, man. The California condor. I'm glad it's still around. But to answer your question, I think candidates. I think we need to communicate these things to candidates at every level. You know, candidates not only for the state legislature, but candidates for county supervisor and candidates for city council, because the cities and counties are doing a lot of this stuff. Even the elected positions at the various districts, the water districts and the utility districts, they have tremendous influence. You know, a supervisor in Los Angeles County has a bigger constituency than senators in a lot of states. Somebody on the board of the Metropolitan Water District in Los Angeles, they have 20 million clients. You know, half the state is in the metro. So I think identifying elected officials in some of these very influential agencies and in the cities and counties and getting this information to them would leverage the information a lot. We talked about also just holding journalists accountable, and that if you start to convert a few of them, that's leveraging the information. So, you know, there's a lot of ways to do it. I think influencing the influencers is perhaps the most time effective way. But that's a tough question. You know, when we tried to do the Water Infrastructure Funding Act, every newspaper in the state killed us for no good reason. They didn't even read it. Every environmentalist organization came out against it. And the criticisms they leveled against it were false. They were absolutely false. Mm. So, you know, you're up against a machine. I think the message that financial special interests, like these hedge funds that are buying up land, I think that's a message that would be very powerful with independent and Democratic voters. So maybe pick the ones that have the most oomph and try that on a grassroots level. More generally, I would target the elected officials. I think that's the first place to start, and journalists would be the second place.
Nancy, you got a couple?
Well, I have one here. How do you think we could get voters to turn out? You were talking about, you know, our votes and how many people don't turn out to vote. And what do you think would be, I know you gave three, the education and the crime and the cost of living. What do you think would be the hot topic to hit the people that you were talking about, like the Hispanics and things like that you said would turn them conservative, because that's what they really are. They just, you know, basically, you know, they follow that plan. So what do you think would be the hot topic there?
Well, I think all three of those are hot topics. I think that everybody's getting killed by the cost of living, and the you know, the low income communities are harmed more. You know, if you're a white liberal living in the house you inherited with no taxes from your grandparents, and you're paying, you know, $325 in property taxes a year, and no, I bought my house in 1989, but you know, we benefit from that. We benefit from buying our homes a long time ago. They don't feel it. Wealthy people don't feel it. Successful professionals who aren't necessarily wealthy, they don't feel it. If it costs, you know, $10 for 12 eggs, I go, okay, I'll pay $10. But if you're living in, you know, a low income neighborhood and you're struggling to pay your rent, you've got kids in school, it's killing people. And it all comes down to what are the precursors to the cost of living. It's the fact that we've made everything too expensive, from regulations, water, energy, lumber. We've made land artificially expensive thanks to the Global Warming Solutions Act that Schwarzenegger signed. All of the legislation that spawned, that was the enabling legislation. Then they passed, for example, SB 375, which basically puts a green belt around every city. It's really, really hard to expand cities in spite of the fact that this is a gigantic state. You know, California is only 5% urbanized. Get on the freeway and drive a few miles and look at, there's nothing out there. There's so much room. And they talk about suburban sprawl. We don't have to build on the best farmland in the state. That's only, that's about 16,000 square miles. It's 10% of our land. What about the other 90%? Let's go build there. So the price of land, you can go right across the street in some counties and land that's, 50,000 or 60 or 100,000 an acre. You go across the street and it's $1.5 million per acre because it's entitled. It's land that you're allowed to build a house on. And so the price just goes skyrockets. And the land on the fringes of the city because of that are very expensive land because it's desirable land because you're up against the rural green belt. So those kinds of things have to change. And I think those are hot issues. You talk to anybody, I mean, these are all hot issues. Are you asking me to pick which one is the hottest issue? Because they're all hot issues.
Yeah.
I mean, they just are. I mean, everybody wants something to get done about homeless. Well, let's build shelters and make them go. Why is this so hard? And go into these communities and explain, here's what we're going to do. And you'll win elections. I don't understand it.
I understand that. I know schools are a big hot topic in a lot of places I've been. People are just really fed up with that. So, yeah. Do you have anything else, Gretchen?
I do. I'm gonna throw something out that I don't know if I should even do this because it's probably a whole nother long thing, but I've been hearing and reading more lately about smart cities or cities where everything has to be within 15 minutes or you're just going to do without. Is that, without going into a long thing because we're already over, and I have one more thing after that. Is that something you see? Is that real? Is that a real concern? You know what I'm talking about? The smart cities?
I do. And the, what's a short answer to that? We can't foresee what's coming with artificial intelligence. We can kind of imagine it's a double-edged sword. We knew that when we invented the internet that sooner or later we were going to have connected appliances and we were going to, and the logical, I mean, there are privacy issues that I think Democrats and independents would resonate with those voters. But the core premise behind 15-minute cities is climate change. And they're using climate change as a rationale, a justification for reducing our production and consumption of energy and water and land and all resources. So there's a couple of ways to attack that. I mean, electric vehicles and renewable power, they use more resources, for example. So you can start to expose the hypocrisy of that agenda. I think if you successfully fight the abundance fight, you're going to win the 15-minute city fight. I think that's they're very connected.
Okay. Going back again to that interview that I heard you on, you actually had a kind of a positive message. So I think it would be a good note to end this on. And that was, you talked about, I'm going to just give you a few words and then I don't want to say it for you, but you talked about the successes that we've had for, on the conservative side, considering how we're so outnumbered in the state legislature.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good positive message to end, if you don't mind, kind of going through that.
Yeah.
So that we know we have hope.
Well, I was hoping you wouldn't ask me that because right before we began, I realized that I had mentioned all of the initiatives that failed, the union-sponsored initiatives that failed in 2020 and 2022. They and I can't recite them all from memory, but they tried to do split roll and it failed. the making commercial properties get reassessed, which would kill all the small businesses.
Mhm.
They tried to bring back affirmative action, and that failed. There were like 7 or 8 of them.
There was
They
like 8 of them,
wanted to
right?
unionize the kidney dialysis clinics, which would have been very costly for people that can't afford that. It failed. I'll tell you what, though, I will dig that up and I will put that in the email to accompany the PowerPoint when I send it to you. But the other thing that happened was we did have some surprising victories. And Josh Hoover comes to mind right away. And if you guys are still, putting up with me over there in Sacramento, you did a hell of a job. Josh Hoover and the organization, including the county party that supported him, they won, by the skin of their teeth. And, it was one of those situations where if just a little less had happened, it wouldn't have happened that way. It wouldn't have turned out that way. But Josh, he just worked his butt off. I wrote about, the things that he did, but, one of the things he did, along with just knocking on 40,000 doors, was that Josh had a message that was a common sense message. And, he knew it was important to debunk the perception that they were trying to create, that he was an extremist. And they did everything they could to create that. They spent $4 million against him. He had not just a little over $1 million. So he was outspent almost 4 to 1, and he won. So I think that that's an example of, if you have a strong party organization, and by the way, they also did a lot of ballot verification in Sacramento County. They were observing the counting. So they were running a full spectrum operation. And it matters. It makes a difference.
All right. Well, the 2 of the numbers that I remember from what you said on that, when you were talking about that, was that we only had, the Republicans hold 8 out of 40 seats in the state Senate and 18 out of 80 seats in the Assembly. And we still managed to pull off some victories and keep them from passing some things. So that was kind of the positive message that I wanted us to end on, so that we know that even when it feels like David versus Goliath, we're still making some inroads, and all is not lost. We just need to keep at it.
And look at the end of David and Goliath.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Ring, we have one person that's asking if you will give the name of your book.
Oh,
Yes.
well, there's 2 that are, one's from 2021. It's called Fixing California. So if you, Google Edward Ring Fixing California, it'll come up on Amazon. The other one is called The Abundance Choice. That's from 2022. The Abundance Choice, Our Fight for More Water in California.
Okay. Thank you.
When
Right.
Gretchen was talking about how come we can't get out this message, it's obvious that the media is blocking it. They don't want your message to get out. So it is an uphill battle.
It is, but we didn't realize truly what we were up against until the internet came along. And in spite of all the attempts to get the genie back into the bottle, the internet has been a tremendous source of transparency. I think that we didn't know, back in the old days, we didn't realize that perhaps special interests are, managing our democracy, and now we can see that. So for all of the bad things we can say about how the internet and search is being dominated by some biased monopolies, they can't stop the river, and it's on balance a good thing. Very good.
That is fabulous. I just love
Thank you so much.
What a night this has been. And so we so appreciate your generosity in giving us your time and your talent. And I think it has been an amazing time for all of us. I've learned so much, and I'm sure all of you did too. So we really appreciate this night. And Gretchen, thank you so much for this whole series and then ending tonight on such a high note. It filled me with a lot of hope. And I'm going to hang on to that because I think it's time for California right now to turn around.
Yeah,
And
now is the time.
now is the time, and the timing is just perfect. It's palpable, and a lot of people are just as upset as all of us. Doesn't matter the age or the ethnic background or anything. We're all feeling it, that dissatisfaction with this, what's been done to this beautiful state. Amazing state.
It sure is.
So I just have to thank all of you. I thank Audrey and Sherry and Nancy and Gretchen for putting on this whole series. And tonight, are you going to stay after a little bit, Gretchen? Did you tell that to the?
Yeah, we'll keep it open for a little bit, maybe about 10 or 15 minutes for people that just want to chat a little bit. About
All
10
right.
minutes.
Well, I
Okay.
have enjoyed this night so much, and we want to hear from you again.
Well,
Thank
thank you very
you.
much.
Thank
Really
you so much. Appreciate it.
So I
And
will sign
I'll be
off.
in, yeah, you're welcome to do that. And I will be in touch with you about, I need to get your address for one thing and about getting the PowerPoint if you want to send that. Okay.
Oh,
Yeah, I'll have that for you very shortly. Thank you very
Okay.
much.
Thank you so much.
Say good
Enjoy your
night.
evening.
well, enjoy your chat.
Bye now.
Okay. Bye-bye.